Patsy Schmidt, and we're going to be talking about the historical Elkhorn. When were you both born? I was born in 1943, September.
I was born in November the 2nd, 1922. I was 80.
So, what are some of your first experiences with Elkhorn? What do you remember first?
Oh, very little town. There wasn't much when I came here.
Yeah, you graduated in 41 from a school out near Loop City, Nebraska, and she came to Elkhorn to work as a domestic for Jack Demons, one of the businessmen in Elkhorn. And she kept house for them.
About the only kind of work I could find at that time in those years.
In 1940,
And I graduated from high school.
1941.
Yes.
So how many people were in your graduating class?
I think seven.
Seven?
Seven. And we went to a little consolidated country school. It's still there, but it doesn't go on anymore. It's just, and you'd be surprised, even at that age, we even came to Hastings for different things from way out there. People got around too, those schools. It was a nice school.
So what were some of the early businesses of Elkhorn? I know it was a very small town.
Well,
Was the Hell's Meat Market next door to you when you lived it? Did you actually live in Damon's house with them?
that was on that same street
Yes.
that we had the hotel.
Yes.
Yeah, I stayed at their house, at the hospital, and the market was next door.
Okay, the meat market, Hell's Meat Market. And across the street, the bank was no longer in business. The State Bank of Elkhorn. It had closed.
I think so.
And there was a hardware store where Lockers lived. That was a hardware store.
It was a hardware.
Yeah, we always called the two streets in Elkhorn the upper and lower streets, and we lived on the upper street, and that's where Mother was the domestic for Jack Demons. And he had a bar where like Sam Houston's is now, and it was Demons' bar. So that was on the lower street. So post office and everything was down on the lower street. So, and mostly, had gone to mostly residential on the street except for the Hell's Meat Market and the hardware store. Do you remember anything about Kiner Saloon, any stories? Well, see, now, like my mother, coming in 1941, the Kiner Saloon is now a warehouse and a rooming house for the Witt family. But my parents, in 1946, lived in the street, in the house right across the street from the Kiner Saloon. So it was just a place that we could look out our living room window and look right into that Kiner Saloon. But it was a warehouse when we lived there. Do you remember much about the Dinker Hall that happened there? Any dances?
Oh, yes. That was a very interesting spot in Elkhorn. They had roller skating, they had dancing. It had just everything. It was a nice brick building. Too bad, because it was a very useful building.
The drugstore was there,
Yes.
and an implement dealer.
That's right.
Do you remember anything about the railroad coming through?
Well,
You want to tell stories? See, the railroad, when it came through in 1866, okay, when my parents lived there, there was still steam locomotives. You want to tell them about how us kids...
steam, it was coal.
Yeah, coal, but they burned coal to make the steam. Yeah. And
And there was, how many went through there? And
every couple hours, steam locomotives would go through Elkhorn.
And they would burn so many cinders all the time too, you know. And she was one of them would go outside and come in the house and say, "Oh, my eye." I said, "Well, you got a cinder in your eye. I'd have to help you get it out." I said, "Don't go out there and look at that," because that's the way they, just look what it has improved up today, hasn't it?
Yeah, diesel.
And
But she made a remark, telling about Mick said that if you noticed on a locomotive coming through town, if it had black smoke, it was loaded with cinders.
Yeah,
And if it was white smoke,
you could look at it.
you could look at the train, because you wouldn't get cinders. And interesting to note is Elkhorn burned completely on the west side in 1895 from a cinder on a train that had gone through. So my mom has a lot of stories to tell about the hobos that used to ride the trains.
Oh, I mean, I just was hoping that none of them got left off because they'd probably come to our house.
And want some food or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but,
But, yeah, they would come and get off the trains, but we would see them on
see,
the
that was
trains.
their only way to get from
Across the country was on the rail. Did you ever feed any hobos?
I think we had to have a few at the door.
They would leave a sign on your house if you were a good person and had given them food. So, Mother had been good to the hobos, so they knew.
Not too often, though.
You know, but they knew.
But they knew, I mean, I didn't want them to do anything wrong, because I didn't have much use for them either. Because when they're traveling through like that,
But my parents, when they lived in that hotel, it was called the Lincoln Highway Hotel.
Yeah.
They ran that as a rooming house, and they had a lot of families that lived there with them, and a lot of people that would come. It was just like your Super 8 motel of the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
People would come through town and would need a room for the night, and my parents ran that as a rooming house.
and then there was also workers that stayed there that had jobs
On the railroad and
in different places.
highway and
Workers.
And we had people that worked at Exarban in Omaha that stayed out there. And we had people that lived, or that were from the radar base, when they built the radar base north of Elkhorn.
It was, and there, what did you figure, there's 30 families
At one time lived with us
with us at different times. So you know,
over the years. And we only lived there 15 years.
but a lot of them just started their homes in a little apartment and had to have, and then they got on their feet and they went on and got something better. But that's the way, in the old days, everyone had to start out to get somewhere.
So, are there any really vivid memories about, especially banks, early banks, like Elkhorn Bank?
We banked in the same bank. How many times has it moved, Patty?
It's moved, it was down on Main Street, Farmer State Bank. And it was robbed twice when we were down there. In the middle of the night, if we'd have been paying attention, we'd have heard the robbers trying to break into, they were using a
See,
hammer.
it was only down the hill.
Yeah, from where we lived, it was real close. Imagine Elkhorn was just those couple of blocks.
Yeah.
It isn't stretched all out like it is now. So there was a couple of bank robberies when we lived down there, and then it's moved up. But we've been in the same bank since the 40s.
It's changed its name how many times?
4 or 5 times. It's now American Interstate Bank.
We've done our banking there ever since we.
And we lived on the same block that the State Bank of Elkhorn was, where, and this happened before my mother ever came to Elkhorn, was when John Wyatt was killed. He was shot and killed in that bank robbery. And my grandmother remembers the funeral. John Wyatt's buried out there in Prospect Hill Cemetery. And his funeral procession was like 4 miles long. It was really, yeah, and cars. There were a few cars back in those days yet, because it's been in the 20s.
Probably
So, do you remember anything about the Native Americans that lived around here, or did they just kind of stay out of the picture?
There were no Indians that lived anywhere, Native American. Mm-mm. There were none.
So,
Was it Eaglers?
Oh, well.
That's all
later.
later,
Yeah.
many years later.
I know there was a lot of fire departments. Fire was a big thing,
Mhm.
in our south. What do you know about the fire departments of Oakland?
Well, your husband served on it.
Yeah, they started them, and I don't remember what year it was, maybe it's 20 some years. And it was rough too, I mean, they didn't have the things they have today.
Yeah.
Best of it.
I don't recall any of the fires either, do I?
We didn't have really any major fires.
Do you have any memories about the Lincoln Hotel? I mean, the Lincoln Highway?
Just that we lived in a hotel that was called the Lincoln Highway Hotel. But you remember a lot of times Mom coming home from Omaha on that brick road all the way through there.
I recall a lot of the roads that weren't very good at all, but they were now, a lot of them, very simple.
When you first came to Elkhorn, that was paved road all the way. Well, the Highway 31. Well, Highway 31 was only paved to Maple Street, wasn't it? It was gravel. It was still gravel even after the viaduct there, because it got paved after you guys built your house in 1961 right on that Highway 31. The Elkhorn really owes its growth to where it's been. Highway 31 going north and south, Lincoln Highway coming from Omaha from the east and going through. The Lincoln Highway has carried a lot of people and the railroad. And there we were sitting watching. There's a lot in the past
Yeah.
that happened before we were ever there. But like Dwight David Eisenhower coming through in 1919 on a motorcycle. He was a captain, came right through. They had a lot of road races on the Lincoln Highway that went through. They had Emily Post, the lady who wrote the book on etiquette. She came through in a car kind of way ahead of her time. But that's why Elkhorn's main street, which was the Lincoln Highway, it prospered. Elkhorn was actually larger in its infancy than Omaha because of a man named George Crawford, who was, I consider, the founder of Elkhorn. And we happened to live in the same building that George Crawford lived in. Okay, he was a ranch, he drove cattle all the way from Texas. His son was Frank Crawford ran the Elkhorn Independent newspaper. He was he speculated on everything. You heard him talk about Forest City, and that's where all the lumber that built Elkhorn came from because of all the trees that were down along the Elkhorn River. So, when my mom arrived in the 40s, Elkhorn, George Crawford was gone already. So there was just a lot of things that happened prior to Elkhorn, but we stayed little. We used to ride the Greyhound bus through Elkhorn.
That's how we got to Omaha.
Because not every family had cars.
No. And if we wanted to go, so we'd get together and go down on the lower street, there was a bus depot.
On the Lincoln Highway, and
go downtown.
the bus would come through at 11, something
Yeah,
in
it
the
was in the
morning.
morning and arrived back by 6, I think, that night. So you had the chance to shop.
In Omaha quick. It would take you all the way down to 18th and Farm, and there was the bus depot down there. And that followed the Lincoln Highway past, Boys Town and that whole area, all the way into Omaha. And that's how we got on got to Omaha because
And there was lots of them rode that bus.
Yeah.
The ladies and all, the families. Because the working men
had to have a car to drive.
for everything.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't have cars either. So, but Alcorn's been in the right spot at the right time for a long. But we stayed little, I think because of our terrain. We don't have flat land, so we didn't bring in a lot of commercial businesses. And we were more residential. And we were more farming. And we've switched from that. And there's very few farms left in the Alcorn School District. It's just, when my parents built their house in 1961, that was all cornfield across the street where there's the bowling alley now.
Now look
Yeah,
where
And
there is.
Dick's Market. See, that was-
Banks, telephone bills, both down.
Mhm.
Everything come up. That was just all cornfield.
So
And we've
lots
been there
of-
40-some years that way,
In that
in that house.
Yeah, we moved there in 61, yeah. So 42 years you lived in that house,
No, we're not big movers.
yeah. No.
That's one thing.
One thing I was wondering is, were there a lot of celebrations, like marriages, New Year's? Did a lot of people get together for celebrations every year?
That was a lot of free shows. That was a lot of get-togethers. Elkhorn was noted for a lot in community things, like you would say, there were
We had a lot of
weddings,
parades,
and weddings. It was a lot. It was a nice get-together time.
Like they would have free shows every Wednesday night. And they would block off the street and they would have a movie screen put up. And Woody Woodpecker would echo his voice all the way down the alleys of Elkhorn with the volume. And my mother would pop us some popcorn, we'd have a blanket, and we'd go up and we'd sit on the street. And our parents would shop because Wednesday night the business places open, like the market, the Elkhorn. We had two grocery stores, and a grocery store on the upper street and a store down on the other one. Yeah, and the parents would come in and do their grocery shopping, and the children would sit and watch the free movie. It was a thing to draw them into the community at night. So. You guys have a mall to go to, and we sat on a blanket eating popcorn and watching a free movie.
AMC.
Mm-hmm. Any other question about?
Any stories you'd like to tell about Elkhorn?
Well, like I said, we have had a front row seat to watching Elkhorn grow. My parents, when they lived in the Lincoln Highway Hotel, everything was going on, whether it was going by the railroad, on the old Lincoln Highway, all the business establishments. It was a neat, safe place to grow up in. We could go down to the Papio Creek, which Mother did not like us to do because we'd get dirty down there. But we would spend a lot of time messing around in the creek and getting dirty, playing Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. We'd make our own rafts and things like that. And the railroad being so close, Mother always warned us about the hobos.
Yeah.
And about the
Being on
train.
the tracks.
Yeah, being on the tracks. Trains went through a lot more than they do today.
Yeah.
There was a lot more train. And our house would actually shake. And when we'd have people come stay, they'd say,
Tell that one incident of our cousin that stayed in that one room in the hotel, and it was even with the railroad track, and here comes a train. He thought it was going to come right in there and get him.
because they had big lights.
Yeah.
And see, it ran and the light was coming right toward him, but it really,
Yeah.
I mean, we only lived a street away from the railroad tracks. So when it was coming from the west.
And he thought it was going to come right in and get him. He got up and
Well, when we lived there for 15 years, we
You
grew
get
so
used to it.
used to the
Yeah.
train
Used to the
coming
sounds.
through. We never heard them during the night, but when we'd have new people stay with us,
they would get
they would hear the train and they would wonder. And then we had all of those grain trucks that would come with all
Oh,
the,
with that mill.
we had a mill that was across the way, and the farmers would bring all their grain in, and they would load up the elevator, so then it would be put onto the railroad cars and taken all over the United States. And that's, we had a lot of activity. We had 3 mills that were right there. Like I say, we had a front row seat to everything going on. We were before television. So when the very first television came, my mom and dad, we used to go down to this place called Frosty's, and down on the lower street. And television came in, and the whole community would go down there. And
Kids.
Frosty's wife, Henry Frost, and Helen Frost would turn the TV on early in the morning and then shut it off late at night. But anybody going by could watch this little TV, and it was like a little 10-inch screen, and we'd all sit around and watch